Hello everyone and welcome to my video today. Today I am discussing ghosts and hauntings. Hello everyone. I see you all in the comments. It's good to see you all again and I hope you're all having a lovely day. I was just inclined to speak on this topic. I guess I will share a little bit of my personal perspective about ghosts and hauntings and about the afterlife, because it gives hauntings a bit of context. So first I'm going to kind of talk about what I've experienced is happening when we pass on to better understand how a haunting habit happens. So when we pass on, my view of it is that we go to this other plane that I kind of refer to as the transitional plane, where we review our life experiences. And from there, we are then sent to the next stage of our spiritual path. For most of us, this is reincarnation. So when you get a ghost, what has happened is that when the person passed on, they refused to move onto the transitional plane and they stayed here in the astral plane, technically. We can take for granted how difficult it is to let go of the entire life we just experienced. Even though our souls are eternal, moments are not, life isn't. So that can be a bit intense. And a few people, when they get to that point, realize that they're not ready, and so they remain, and that's how you get a ghost, typically. And sometimes, unfortunately, people stay behind because of traumatic experiences or something else that they're not ready to let go of. And so a spirit can be attached to a person, a place, and sometimes objects. And the longer a spirit is a ghost, there is the chance that they will become detached from their sense of identity, especially if they're around long enough that others who knew them in life are no longer around to kind of ground their identity. And as that identity fades or they continue to remain stuck in their emotional turmoil, the spirit can start to deteriorate, and that is how you get more violent ghosts and hauntings. It's very popular to ascribe these violent hauntings to demons or demonic activity, and rarely it will actually be such a creature, but more frequently it is one of these deteriorating souls. And they can become quite violent and quite powerful in affecting the living. So stories about people's health deteriorating, accidents, things being moved, etc. Frequently these are these troubled spirits. Just observing the comments. Thanks for dropping by, everyone. So that's a bit of my perspective of what is happening. There is more I could go into it about, but I think I'll keep it a bit basic. And if there are questions, I'll get into it more. I just don't want to ramble on and on and on and lose my train of thought. So that's kind of my sense of what is happening on the other side. And why do hauntings happen? Because people choose to stay behind for one reason or another. And there are a lot of different reasons why. Some have to do with trauma, some have to do with wanting to look after those we love, or otherwise not wanting to let people go, and sometimes it can be negative. Spirits are just people like you and I, and so just as though there are good people and bad people and everything in between, they're good. That doesn't change just because the person has deceased. If they were not a great person in life, then they are still that person, even in death. And some people do choose to stay behind in order to, for very negative reasons, and those frequently become the troublesome hauntings that people have to deal with later on. How to handle a haunting? Well, frequently it depends on exactly what it is one is dealing with, but some basic things you can do are to establish your home as your territory. I'm just trying to think of how to generalize this. And the most important thing is to be extremely firm and to not fear the spirit, which may be difficult depending on the experiences, and to essentially say that it's not permitted to be where it is anymore. Ideally, you would want to move the entity onto the transitional plane, but for your own sake, moving it off of your property or out of your residence is ideal. I know that sounds very simplistic, but there's a lot of specific methods for doing this, but essentially what you want to do is claim your home as yours, like this is mine, this is my space, and I don't want you in it, and you can't be in it. And like with magic, dealing with spirits is frequently a contest of wills. So it's really a matter of you wanting your home more than the spirit does. And some spirits are very willful, so if it doesn't seem, it can seem very simplistic, but when you boil it down to its essence, that is essentially the most effective way of dealing with a haunting you currently have or preventing anything else from coming into your home at all. Tamanda asks, what do people mean when they talk about resurrection? Well, I don't know, because I'm not sure what you mean by resurrection. Resurrection is like people coming back to life. I guess you'll have to define that term, because I'm not sure in what context you mean it. I've never heard of that in context to hauntings. Right. So I've had quite a few experiences in dealing with the deceased, in removing spirits from people and locations, and observing ghosts in their natural habitat. I don't always remove them, especially if they are in historical locations. And I've had different experiences at different stages of my experience level. So obviously when I was a fresh student, I actually visited the Queen Mary, which is a famous haunted location in Long Beach, California. And I experienced a lot of things there, but I was not at a point in my development where I could do anything about it. In fact, I did not even have any solid protective techniques listed. So it was a very interesting, terrifying visit. I knew enough to be able to perceive them. So it was still kind of fun in an odd sort of way like that. Most of my experiences in removing entities is by doing this remotely. And I know that the entity is gone based on my energetic observation, but people also report a significant change in the environment and in themselves after the removal. And it is just kind of an interesting experience. My partner also does this, and she's actually a medium. I am able to use my clairvoyant abilities to function similarly as a medium would, but technically I'm not a medium. So I can perceive spirits and speak to them and hear them and move them along. I've just learned to mold my ability to kind of serve the same function, even though it's not the same ability. Hello, hello. I'm just trying to think of like more specific things, like experiences that I've had. Something I will say, speaking of how to keep things out of your home, maybe you don't have a haunting, but sometimes, especially if you're intuitive, you can attract things to your home. So there's always new things. Or if you're not, um, if your home doesn't have a protective barrier, then anything just kind of wandering out in the world can pass through your home. They frequently don't stay, but it's not always pleasant to have people coming in and out. Uh, Years ago, when I was first learning about all this, I had a lot of problems with that. Different kinds of entities wandering into my home. I would frequently perceive them in the dream state. So while I was sleeping in my dreams, I would be in my apartment and I would see this entity or that entity, and they would startle me awake, and I would have to grab my candles and I would fumigate my house with frankincense. And that usually took care of it, but it was very unpleasant being woken up all the time by them. One of them, very memorably, was a black eyed child. You may not have heard of this phenomenon, but it's a spirit with a very characterized appearance that a lot of people have seen. It's not like one entity, it's like a whole bunch of them that kind of have that general appearance of being children with black eyes. So it was very spooky. And so I knew enough to kind of get rid of whatever had wandered into my apartment that night. But eventually I learned to claim spiritual territory, or essentially affirming your sense that your home belongs to you in every sense of the word. So therefore, your will is absolute in this location, and nothing is permitted to intrude on it. So it's like a mindset that is very protective. Of course, some of the things I did in the early days before I could really do that successfully was to line my doorways and my windowsills with salt. And I did frequent house clearings using salt and sage and frankincense. I actually prefer frankincense because sage is completely neutralizing. Sometimes you need that, but it wipes out good and bad energy. And whatever energy is around the cleared space will get sucked in, because nature doesn't like a vacuum. And so if there's a lot of negative energy around your location or the space you clear, that's not exactly ideal. Frankincense is an ancient blessing ritual incense, so it clears, but it also sanctifies the space at the same time. Hello, everyone. Penelope shares, my daughter sees spirits often. They can be white or black. She sees them running by. That's very interesting. Other things I did. I was a bit extreme or messy. I'm not sure what you'd want to call it, but one of the protective things I used to do in my apartment, and yes, I had to clean it up before I moved out of said apartment, was blessing white candles to Archangel Michael, and dripping the white candle wax over the windowsills and the doorways, especially the entry to my house. My apartment actually had two entryways, a front and a back, so I had to seal all the entryways that way by dripping the wax across the floor around the thresholds and into the corners of each room to really do that. I also kept a altar to a goddess at the time, one of the Irish goddesses, inviting a sacred divine energy into your home by keeping an altar is one way to keep your home protected from entities. Unless you specifically ask the deity to keep things out, it's not enough to keep them out per se, but it does assist the atmosphere overall. I created pouches that I hung on the walls and such that were filled with things like cinnamon, dragon's blood, and other protective herbs and ingredients. a space in my home that was reinforced was around my bed. If you're only able to protect one thing, protect where you sleep. Not, and we're very vulnerable when we sleep to spirits, but also if you don't get your rest, you can become weakened over time and like in quite a literal way, which leaves you more susceptible while you're awake. Your ability to sleep undisturbed is the most important thing. So if that's the only thing you're able to defend or keep things away from, do that. Thank you for sharing, Penelope. Julie asks, is it possible for a spirit to enter someone else's body? Yes. Yes, it is. Um, and there's varying degrees of that. So a person can be influenced by a spirit or be in a state of what's sometimes called oppression, where it's like a state of heavy influence or light possession. 'Cause there's varying degrees of how in the spirit is. They could just be kind of riding on you and influencing you through their energy, or it could be suppressing your personality and allowing their influence to be stronger, or they can actually enter your body and be controlling what you do and say and such. And obviously, it's quite a peculiar thing. I'd say full possession is not very common. I'd say oppression is more frequently what occurs, which is that spirit's energy kind of suppressing you into a passive state so that it can exert influence more readily. So, yes, there are certain people who are more vulnerable to that type of influence into being possessed than others. And there are various things you can do to protect yourself. Most of the time, unless you're living in a haunted location or you frequent by one, it's not a major threat for most of us. Wearing protective amulets can help. And a protective amulet is any jewelry is the most practical thing to use, something that's highly sentimental or that you has a religious icon that you believe in and you believe the object will protect you. Sentimental items are best because there's a lot of emotional charge in them, especially if it's like a gift from someone who cared a lot about you. What else? Obviously, unfortunately, those who struggle with various addictions are especially prone to that type of influence because their will is already weakened due to their dependency. And other people who are not very assertive or strong willed can be susceptible, or people who are very emotional, in specifically a way of like being too sympathetic, especially towards ghosts or spirits. If you sympathize too greatly, especially if you're aware of it and you know something about its story, sympathizing too much can leave you open to its influence in that way, especially if you're feeding it your feelings, whether it's pity or fear or anger or whatever feeling it is you have towards it. Hello, we have some people popping in now and then. Welcome. So yes, if you do happen to be dealing with a spirit or haunting that you don't want in your home or around you, there are ways you can get rid of it, or you can turn to help. I have removed a lot of entities from locations and people. It's a pretty simple process. Some entities can have themselves really rooted in locations, especially if it's where they died and their blood was spilt on the earth. That's a pretty strong anchor for some ghosts that are around. So I've kind of talked about some generalities of what I used to do to help keep things out and to remove things. But sometimes what you do will need to be more specific depending on what is there. And the most important thing to remember is that no matter how frightening or powerful a spirit or a ghost may seem, because you are incarnated in a physical form, you have a distinct advantage over it. And to remember that you are more powerful than it. And it's a very normal reaction to be afraid, but try to not be, and remember that it cannot hurt you. That may be hard if you have already experienced harm from it, or knowing so many stories in which people are hurt. It is, if you develop that mindset and really know it for yourself, it does act as a form of protection, having that sense of certainty in yourself. So a lot of it can be a bit of a mind game you play with yourself, developing these psychic defenses against these kinds of entities. Andrew asks, why do people get spirits around them or in their homes? Well, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Why do hauntings happen? Most frequently, it was already there, and it being there is related to its death in some manner, or why it chose to stay behind, something it's holding on to. People can attract spirits to them either because they are psychic, whether they know it or believe it or not, doesn't matter. They will be drawn to you if you have pronounced ability of any kind. People who are emotionally sensitive, people who have a lot of repressed emotions and emotional blocks. One reason why it's very important to work on our emotional healing and on our self-love. People who have a lot of self-loathing, addictions, who have a lot of anger or sadness or depression can attract spirits. The spirits are typically attracted to people who are similar to them in some way, whether it's a emotional frequency, something related to the manner they're passing, or again why they stayed behind. There's usually a pattern or a preference the spirit has that draws them to certain people for whatever purpose they have. Typically, a spirit won't be drawn to like a location. It's usually a person in the location or a quality about it if they weren't already there. Anahi comments about an experience she, I assume, is having or used to have with a entity following her. You speak about it in the past tense, so I assume that it was resolved, perhaps on its own or otherwise. Again, because spirits are people like us, and we all have our unique individual motivations for doing anything, so do spirits, although sometimes there are some generalities we can make. There are a variety of reasons it may have been drawn to you. Unfortunately, again, whoever a person was in their life, that doesn't just go away if they become a ghost. So sometimes entities are attracted to women. If they were cruel to women in their life, they will continue that pattern in death. If they disliked a certain group of people or certain characteristics or habits, they will continue to persecute those people as ghosts. It may be it may have related to you based on emotions you carry within yourself, or you might have just been passed through the wrong kind of place wherever it was, and it decided it just liked something about you. The possible reasons are incredibly numerous. Because you speak in past tense, I'm glad that it's not there anymore. because that's never pleasant to deal with. All right, so this is kind of a general thing. I wanted to talk about ghosts and hauntings. So I hope this information has been interesting to you and provided a little insight. My inbox is always open for those of you who have questions or are seeking guidance about something you're experiencing or a problem that you're having and how to address it. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me today, and I will see you all again soon.